Well, welcome to the latest edition of Ed Talks, a podcast talking to interesting people from within the property industry. I am going to preface what I'm saying by the fact that the person who we very kindly borrowed this boardroom off is sitting directly above us and talks very loudly. So if you hear someone talking in the background, I do apologise. But my guest this week is Paula Higgins, and Paula is the chairman of the HomeOwners Alliance.
Chief Executive.
Chief Executive.
And founder.
Chief Executive and founder. Well, there you
don't
go.
have a chairman.
I stand corrected. And the important thing is that a lot of you, because most of my listenership, if I can call it that, is in a estate agency, I've always been, what's the right word, slightly feeling that the Homeowners Alliance sometimes feels like it's up against estate agents, because some of the advice you give about how to pick your agent is based on things that estate agents don't like talking about, for instance, fees up front and that sort of thing. So I'm very interested to talk to Paula about a lot of that. It happens to be 10 years since she founded the Homeowners Alliance, so congratulations to you for that.
Thank you.
And also, what I don't think a lot of people know is that Paula started she started as a civil servant. So first of all, hello. Why don't you explain a little bit about what the Homeowners Alliance is and how you started?
Excellent. Well, thank you for inviting me to be here. So I had the idea for Homeowners Alliance. I was 15 years as a civil servant working in government, also worked in Brussels. So I did things like the energy performance certificates for buildings. I was involved in the negotiation of that at the European level, and then also the implementation of that. So I've worked in lots of different bits and pieces of the civil service, but I felt that, and one interesting job was when I was working building regulations. And at the time, I'd have sort of big house builders coming to me saying, "Oh, we don't need to do inspections. Oh, consumers want to save some money." And I was like, "Well, I'm not sure about that." And these would be new homes, and I'd go out and try to speak to consumers. And there's no one to speak to, which wouldn't return our calls, and it was really difficult. And I actually spent a day, I went out to the Ideal Home Show and did a whole sort of stall trying to get people to engage with people, what they wanted with their new build home, and I couldn't because they're interested in wallpaper. So I felt that there wasn't a voice of the homeowner and those who aspire to own. So that's why I looked at what was happening in other countries. I went to other countries and looked at Norway and in Netherlands in particular, and decided I wanted to do something about it. So I left the civil service, took a extension on my mortgage, and set up Homeowners Alliance, and that was 10 years ago. And really to be the voice of the homeowner and those who aspire to own. So just to sort of counteract, I felt that housing is huge for people. It's their biggest asset, it's their biggest purchase, and actually when it goes wrong, it can go very badly wrong, and for well-being. So that's why I felt very passionate to set up Homeowners Alliance.
So yes, because one of the biggest issues you must have had is that you're in a sort of B2C market. You're trying to get consumers, and obviously we know that there are 800,000, a million people, whatever it is, move every year, but getting to them is quite difficult. So you've obviously built up an inventory of these people. How many visitors do you have to your website now?
Well, we have 5 million visitors a year to our website, and those are unique visitors, and those are ones that are coming looking for buying and selling. So because I think when we set up 10 years ago, we did sort of independent reports, and we just published consumer guidance, that stuff that you couldn't find out. So one of our first pieces that was very popular is, how much should I pay an estate agent? Just wondering, or what does exchange mean? What's completion? How do I buy a house? This basic stuff that you couldn't find anywhere. So that's how we've built it up organically, and people find us through organic Google. We don't pay for advertising. And
you're so right, because people, it is different. When I started in the business in the late 70s, early 80s, people moved every 2 or 3 years. They could, people bought a 1-bedroom flat, then had a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom house, 5-bedroom, they move. Now they don't. They tend to sort of jump. And whereas it used to be 3 years or so, what we used to call the itch cycle, it's now nearer, I think it's 17 years or something absurd. It's very, very long. So people don't engage with the process very often. So as you say, they really don't understand, A, what the process is, and B, how to navigate through it, and see the language.
Yes.
The number of people out there who still don't understand, and this is partly the agent's fault, because when they put a property on the market, they put a board outside it. When they agree an offer, they put a huge, great big sign saying sold, with tiny little letters subject to contract at the bottom. And everyone then thinks it's sold. So they all relax and think, great, I bought my property, when you and I both know that's just the start of the process. if the public understood better what the process was, they'd say, they'd be on it. They'd be onto their solicitor and onto their estate agent. So, I mean, part of your process has been obviously building up that inventory, building up the number of people who come and visit you. Who do you go to for your advice on the other side? So is it you? Do you have other people that work for you that say you need to be doing this, this and this?
So we work very closely with lots of industry groups, lots of trade associations. We try to get all of our guidance checked, so the Law Society, the Conveyancing Alliance. And you've got to remember that we're across everything to do with home buying and selling and owning. So estate agents is just one part of it. And actually, to be honest, some of the biggest areas of friction or complaint to our site when people come to us in a desperate state is usually it's new homes and it's leasehold. And estate agents may be number 3, or the process of buying and selling. So we're very conscious, we're very keen to get everything checked. We, I think, have a fairly good relationship with the industry. And if we get things wrong, we'll admit it and we'll get things changed. So I encourage people to look at the site, and we might not say, and I think we say very much the same things that estate agents would say, but we might say it in a slightly different way. So it's about do your research, go and find 3 estate agents, ask these questions, look at the contract. And that's where we also fundamentally support it with independent research. So we looked at, we did different reports and different aspects of home ownership or stamp duty. We've been campaigning for stamp duty, and just really trying to educate consumers on how to engage professionally with professionals. So I think we're kind of all on the same side.
Absolutely.
And just making, I think, a lot for consumers, it's expectation. So we'll get first-time buyers coming to say, I've just put an offer on a house, I'll be in by Christmas. Like, no, you won't. Or what's, I'm not going to get a survey done. Well, are you sure?
I mean, everybody likes a qualified buyer. So the person who knows more about the process is going to be a good thing for the estate agent, the conveyancer, the mortgage broker. It's going to help everybody. So, and one of the reasons I'm interested to talk to you, and you and I have had we've interacted in the past, and I've always been fascinated by what you do because, and I'm sure estate agents will be very glad to hear that the number 3 on the list of sort of difficulties behind new homes and leasehold. But as I say, a lot of my audience will be estate agency biased, so they'll be interested particularly to hear what you say about that. And I think there's always been a slight feeling that there's been a bit of them and us about what you do and estate agents do. In other words, it's almost like estate agents are feeling that they're being, what's the right word? Ask these questions of estate agents, and your take on estate agents is not that they're bad people or anything like that. It's just about how to get the best out of them and how to get the most efficient information.
Well, I'd also say it's transparency. So when we did, I think you're probably referring back to an investigation we did in 2014.
Yeah.
And we looked at estate agent contracts and fees. And we did a very thorough, it hadn't been done before. We looked at 100 websites. We called up mystery shopped estate agents. And we found that, a lot of them weren't very open about their, general fees. They felt that they had to come to the sofa and talk to you. Some of the contracts are some, really dodgy things like non-refundable, 20-week contracts, tie-in periods, very long liability periods. But we also found that actually there was a really amazing cohort of, and they were generally the more independent agents who were brilliant, absolutely brilliant, and were there and confident and very open about it and transparent. And that's the sort of stuff that we're trying to get across to the estate agent world, but also to the consumer world, that you get what you pay for, and you can negotiate. You don't just get given what's on the plate. You should be reading that contract and questioning things, because that is a legal document.
And do you think much of that's changed since 2014?
I think it has. So we've, I've read hundreds of estate agent contracts because we used to help people specifically on that. And I sit on the consumer group for the TPO and other consumer groups. And I think it has. I mean, back then, the contracts themselves, a lot of them didn't talk about VAT. So that's something that legally you're supposed to have, quote, fees inclusive of VAT. And at the time, it wasn't, or it's like, very, very in the detail of it. Especially the onlines were quite bad at that initially, if you remember that. And also things like the dual commission, for instance. That was another thing, is that, if people weren't happy with their estate agent, they moved to another one. And they weren't really made aware. Now the TPO guidance has been updated and it's much more aware on all sides that actually, if they are going to move estate agents, that they've got to be aware of this dual commission liability. And I think that, people shouldn't have to pay twice for, to sell their home once. So I think things have changed. I think it has become more professional. The contracts are clearer and maybe less hidden charges.
Okay,
But
well
there's still a way to go.
that's okay. Yeah, but that's good progress. And I mean, as we've discussed before, it's so difficult to find anywhere that gives you sensible, cogent advice on selling your home. It's just really difficult to find anywhere. So I think you've grown to occupy that space for consumers, and I think it's.
And I should say we have tools like other, and we really like comparison, and so we have something called our Find an Estate Agent tool. We go in and it's just land registry data, and you can see the performance of the estate agents based on land registry. And we use it, we say this is just a good indication, maybe help you choose your top 3 agents you want to speak to. But that's sort of the advice that we give is just don't talk to the first person that comes through the door, and just be a smart shopper.
Yes, because I often get asked who. People come to me and say, I'm thinking of selling, who should I talk to? Which estate agent should I talk to? And my advice in the past has always been to go to one corporate, one local independent, and someone in between.
Yeah.
And talk to at least 3. And I think for anybody listening to this who is not an estate agent wondering what to do, would your advice differ particularly from that? I mean, you probably say go to our website and have a look, but
no, I would say exactly that. We say go to 3, get 3 valuations. Be a bit wary if they're they definitely have to come to the sofa and talk to you about it. And also give them the price of what the other estate agent said, and don't go for the highest. If they say we think your house is worth this, don't be greedy about it. We know that the ideal length of time to sell, some of our research is 14 days to get the best asking price. So, you don't want to go too high, you don't want to go too low. So, and we say very much do your research, look at land registry. So all these things, which I think probably estate agents will probably tell their own family members when they're looking to buy or sell.
Yeah, and I think they should do. Do you get involved at all in the tangled web that is lettings?
No.
No, I think that's fine. That's
yes,
fine.
I think it's we made a conscious decision early on that we're very much, but what we do believe in strongly is that we don't want to be a club of homeowners. So we've gotten onto the property, that's it, we're done. And these poor younger people and aspiring homeowners. So we're very concerned about things like affordability, availability of mortgages, and that is sort of socially unjust, really, that people who have professional jobs, but if they don't have the bank of mum and dad, they can't get onto the property ladder. As soon as you get onto it, at least previously, your rents would be less, your mortgages would be less, and you've got an asset. So we do quite a lot of work on that, and we do like an annual homeowner survey looking at affordability, and we campaign for stamp duty for no stamp duty first time buyers, and no stamp duty for people who are buying homes to live in.
Yeah. Another one of the things that I think is interesting to talk about is how many reports you've commissioned on various things. And I think you've got a list there somewhere of all the reports, and it's quite a long list.
Yes.
Including modern method of auction, spray foam.
Yes, and we do an annual homeowner survey every year where we're sort of trending about affordability, and we've done spotlights into new homes, leasehold reform, mortgage, people understanding their mortgages. So we do a lot of research into, to make sure we get.
And those are all listed on the website, are they? So
are.
if someone goes on,
Yeah.
if anybody listening to this wants to go on hoa.org.uk, they can see all of these surveys, what they were, what they say. I think that's fascinating because, the spray foam thing in particular for me, it always looked like a very good idea. And I'm sure we've all read the horror stories of people having to, mortgage companies saying, we're not going to give you a mortgage unless you remove it all so we can see whether there's any rot.
Yes, and it's ridiculous because actually government is funding installers, so they've actually building for life programs, so they're actually supporting that. It's on their list of VAT-free measures. So government supporting it. Consumers are thinking, yes, this is a good thing to do, and we've got sort of vulnerable people who are being door knocked from aggressive sales. So it's stuff like that we really, really try to highlight, and we did a little investigation. We've told government about it. Hopefully get a bit further in the wider media to warn people.
Well, that's precisely the sort of thing that I think is really is good work that you're doing. Frankly, the government more often than not does these things with the best of intentions. And of course, insulating your roof sounds like a really good idea. And when the government was pitched this, they thought that's a no-brainer, we'll help from that. But then they didn't realise what the consequences were.
Yeah, I think it's it's different parts of government, so that's the difficulty. So it might be good for the energy efficiency costs or energy efficiency, but then actually there's wider concerns, and whether government properly consults industry like the surveyors and people who have concerns about spray foam insulation. I'm not sure that's
Well, I think the government needs to get themselves together to a large extent. But anyway, that hopefully happens. I think the grown-ups are back in charge. We're talking here at the end of November in 2022, by the way. So if by the time you listen to this, things have changed, who knows?
Oh dear.
Certainly for estate agents, I think it would be very interesting for them to visit your site and have a look at it.
Oh yeah, and come and tell me what they think.
Well, I think it would be useful. I mean, part of the problem, as you alluded to, it's taken you 10 years to build up this database of people. Personally, I've never felt that owning a home should be a right. I think certainly, as I think I said to you, as we were talking about before, we've both got twins. My son lives in Berlin, and in Berlin ownership is not really a thing. Everybody rents, because in Germany it's a very different ballgame. The big pension funds buy big development, they build big developments and then they rent them with a known return. It helps with their pension fund.
The build to rent.
The build to rent sector out there is much better, and they don't expect to get all their return from capital growth. I mean, would you, whilst you're campaigning for aspiring, and I love the way you also want to try and help people to aspire to own homes and what should they do, and they learn so that when they can, they're completely armed with all the facts. Do you think there's another way for people to find housing, or have you not? Is it not something that you've invested a lot of time thinking about?
No, I mean, no, definitely. So I think that the build to rent sector is really, really interesting, because the difficulty is, and we don't, publicly campaign, and there's lots of campaign groups out there that does that side, but, the tenancy agreements, they're very sort of short-sighted for, and that's the difficulty for tenants if they want to build up to eventually own. So I think it's about giving people choice. Maybe I'll set up another organization, Renters Own Alliance. But so there's nothing. But there's things like having longer term fixed mortgages. For instance, in Germany, that's what they have. They have more like a standard 10 years or even longer than that. And that sort of stuff would help people who might think they want to own. To get onto that, that trajectory, but it's not for everyone. And I do think having a professionalized rental sector is the way to go. And I do think that here is that the fact that you can make more money off your house than you do in your job is not fair.
Sure, but that's always putative though, isn't it? Because people don't really ever cash in that money. I mean, even though they can earn more because the value of their home is going up. It's not money they've got in their pocket.
I have friends, who are, fairly professional, like a journalist and other than that actually their buy-to-let portfolio is doing better than what they're actually taking home from their salary.
So they are actually transacting with the properties.
Yeah, so if they are, that's some of the buy-to-let. Yeah, and it's just, because people bought at the right time. We're probably old enough that we've done all right. But I worry for our children. I worry for my children.
Well, I think we have been lucky. Nothing irritates me more than people looking smug about property when in fact they've just been lucky more often than not.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not investing in something like a job or.
But it's partly why I talk about the letting side, because, for instance, I rented for 25 years. And everyone used to look at me as a relatively high-profile agent and say, "What on earth are you doing renting?" And my reason was because I put money into my business.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of entrepreneurs or people who want to put money, there are other ways of making money. And I think the days of looking back at the baby boomers and seeing how well they've done from the equity in their properties is possibly over. I mean, I think as long as the UK doesn't build more property, we're going to continue with this imbalance between supply and demand.
Which is something we also campaign about, sort of, more homes in the right places.
Well, it's the right places and the right type of housing.
Yeah, so, good quality housing. And yes.
So I think that is going to change. I think the balance will change. You talk about new homes and leaseholds. I think most people listening to this will understand that leaseholds have changed. The government has been pressurised into changing.
It's tiny. No changes have really happened.
Really?
It's a two-tier system. So the government has, they've abolished ground rents on new leases. So, and then if you're going to extend, even if it's extend and renew your lease for informal lease extensions. But there's nothing for the existing leaseholders. You're still, if you've got a short lease, you're still going to spend a fortune to try to,
What do you define as a short lease?
Below 80 years.
Below 80 years,
yeah,
okay.
So it's about the mortgage. It's about the mortgage.
So where the marriage value needs to be
And the
paid.
difficulty is because the government is so good at making announcements and not, I'm hoping this bill, the second stage of reform bill will come through, is that we've got people who are waiting. And every year they wait for this, this next stage of reform. They're in a worse and worse position. So, we're really concerned. And actually I've just written to the new housing minister to say, what's happening with this? Because I'm worried that it wasn't in the Queen's speech this year, if it's not going to be in next year, and there's going to be a lot of people set to lose if they do a proper leasehold reform So it's a complicated piece of work.
Well,
So
it is.
we'll
I
see.
mean, I was slightly old school with all that because I used to think that people who owned the land and built the properties had invested in the properties and deserved some sort of a return, and that if the law suddenly changed on behalf of people who held leases and simply said, well, look, you can extend your lease you can buy a 90-year extension for 10 times your ground rent or whatever it is, rather than paying marriage value, which has always been something that's been mooted. That was inherently unfair to the people that owned the properties.
Yeah.
So there is a balance.
So that
there.
I don't know how, and government will have to find that balance through it, because you can't really, as you say, take away, something that somebody owns. But there is a lot of like the the sort of the professional freeholders have come in, and we see another area with the way the new build estates are being built, because it's almost more on privately, sort of leasehold. It's called fleecehold, and that's like it becoming quite a big thing. So that's the sort of stuff that is really important to get.
Are
right.
you talking about where they put ground rents with very high reviews in, and then they sold those assets on? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so they did that. So
because that's stopped now, hasn't it?
It's
That's
stopped.
been
Yeah.
stopped.
So and actually, and they haven't actually banned. So there's only and in a way that's good, because then the industry itself stopped it, and the Competition Markets Authority has now gotten undertakings from some of these big companies to say no, you can.
Big house builders.
Well, it's the house builders, but also the house builders who sold on the asset to the managing agents to say, well, actually, we're going to revert these leases. You're not going to have the doubling rent clauses. And that's
so how are they getting out of that? Because presumably they sold those on.
They,
and therefore, if they're saying they're going to abolish them, then someone's out of pocket somewhere, aren't they?
So I don't know how. I mean, I know that the Competition and Markets Authority, so I assume it's investigations going there about whether it's anti-competitive, what they've been doing, because the people who bought a leasehold house or bought a property, generally leasehold houses on these estates, were told, oh, for £2,000 you can buy the freehold, it's fine, and then it was sold on. So I don't know the ins and outs of that.
Yeah.
That's where it's gone into the...
I mean, the difficulty for the government, of course, is that a lot of these landowners who have got these leases where inherently they may lose out if the law changes,
Yes.
are the same ones who are probably giving some money to the government or supporting them in some other way. So
See,
it's a real
and I think
dog's breakfast.
Yeah, and the next stage of leasehold reform is it's about existing leases. So this is the 4.1 or 4.7 million existing leaseholders. And that is going to be really tricky. It's going to be really tricky to do so.
And if you had a magic wand you could wave about in terms of new homes, how would you change the way people, because a lot of it's around planning and green belt and brown field sites and all this sort of stuff. I mean, do you have any agenda that you would like to see happening for new build?
It's tricky. I mean, we say we want more new builds, but I mean, fundamentally we've got some big house builders with an awful lot of clout, really. And I know I just look at what happens in other countries, like in Belgium and in Canada, where it's more of plots, and you can sell off the plot, and it's all service plot, and you find your own architect and build it that way. But it's a tricky, because the UK is, we're a very densely populated country, so we need more houses, and this is where the aspiring homeowners, they're very supportive, but where do we want them? Not in our backyard. So it's tricky, but I do think that we need to make sure the standards, we're building good quality homes, and unfortunately I think that some of the homes being built are the ones that make the most amount of money, as opposed to what's actually needed for the population. So maybe the aging population. So if people are looking to downsize, extremely hard, if they want to move on, to find that next step. Bungalows are incredibly scarce, whether you like them or not. So it's that sort of, building properties that the market needs, as opposed to what the people need.
Well, and the environment needs. I mean, there's such an opportunity here for young people to say, we want somewhere that is, carbon neutral. And I know that sounds terribly woke, and an old fart like me talking like that probably doesn't make a lot of sense. But actually, if you're building housing, there's such an opportunity at the moment, and I think the government's missed a big trick in terms of borrowing huge amounts of money to build vast amounts of proper, environmentally friendly housing. I think they've missed an opportunity. But anyway, the opportunity probably is still there somewhere to build a lot of.
I think they probably have to build it themselves almost, as opposed to relying on some of the.
Well, I rather wish
big
when all these businesses were tottering in 2008-9, the government had an opportunity when they were bailing people out to say, well, actually, we'll take over your business, and we'll take over the infrastructure of your business, we'll take over your land bank, and we'll build the right sort of housing. But the trouble is my experience of watching the government try to do anything is that they just
Yeah.
make
And
a
Help
mess
to
of it.
Buy, I mean, whether you like it or hate it or whatever, it did get people, inspire people to but they could have used that as a leverage as well to say, actually,
Yeah.
I want to build, these are the types of properties we want to build. But it's tricky. So maybe, where we were only building enough homes that we needed was after the war and the Home for Heroes sort of program, national house building programs. And when that all fell off, and we are reliant on some big house builders, and
They want to make money.
But they're
answerable
they're shareholders. They're shareholders. So it's a bit of a sticky place we're in.
I think it is obvious from talking to you. It's fascinating, really, because you're luckily quite an analytical person. That's really important, I think, when people look at the Homeowners Alliance. So much of homeowning, or the aspiration to home own, people take from headlines. Prices up, prices down. Prices are up, we really want to own a property. And actually, that's not what it's all about. You need to be looking at buying a property with a really, I always simplify. I'm a broad brush kind of guy, not like you. I'm not a details person, but I've always said the same thing for people. If you want to buy a property, make sure you can live in it for 10 years and you can afford a mortgage rate that's at least 3% higher than the one you're being given.
Yeah.
And if you have those two things, you're probably going to be okay, because hence why no one moves from a 1 to a 2 to a 3 to a 4 bedroom. They go straight from the 1 to the 3 and from the 3 to the 5 if they can now, because they can't afford to keep moving because stamp duty and everything else and all the moving costs are so great. But if you had, I'm acutely aware that we're coming up to sort of 20, 25 minutes we've been talking, and I really don't want people to, this is normally listened to on people's commutes and things. So if you had a few bits of advice, or is there anything in particular that you want to say to an audience that's listening, bearing in mind that this is a B2B audience, you're probably talking to people on the business side rather than your consumers. And I'd love to see you doing more of that consumer stuff, because I think what you have is a tremendous message, and I think I'm sure you and your marketing department are trying to work out ways in which you can do that. But if you had a message you wanted to get out to people, what would you say to them?
Well, I think, it's interesting because, looking at the headlines, looking at what journalists are saying, and that's what we really also try to sort of, communicate to journalists and things like that. So not to sort of, it's all crisis, everythinging's always dire.
It's always either soaring or crashing.
And we do try that. But I think, give us a fair chance as well. Take a look at what we say. And actually, I always find, and I say this to other bits of industry, is that we're probably saying very similar things to what you'd be saying, or you saying to your children if they're looking to buy. But because it's coming from us and we're independent and we're a bit more we're covering lots of different areas in the eyes of the consumer, we might be a good source of advice for them. But engage with us, I'd say. And I think for estate agents is being professional, trustworthy, upfront, and it's not just about the fees. You might think it's about the fees, but actually, if you go in and really sell your service and the job you do, and this is where I found very much when we did our report, it was the independents we found were really impressive. But it's better to have consumers that are educated and to have all the information as opposed to ones that you keep them in a little box, really. So don't be scared. I think sometimes the industry is maybe a bit frightened of criticism or constructive criticism or issues that are arising, which we do try to, it might not be legislation the right thing, but we do try to sort of say, when we're the ones who said to, TPO, look, there's, that's not been included in contracts, or that actually, some estate agents are really pushing buyers into mortgage services, and there's, and so we're really trying to sort of lead the way on helping industry.
Yeah.
So we're there to help industry. Don't listen to whatever you read on the private eye, and PIE or whatever it is. It's not. We're not all sort of doom and gloom, I hope. But come give us advice. We're happy to engage. Really.
Well, I do think that's a very good point. I think for anybody listening to this, if they really want to know what consumers think, they can short circuit a lot of what they may be trying to find out by going to your website and reading some of the stuff.
Yeah, and read some of the comments. Some of the comments we have at the some of our more popular guides. It's really engage with them really as well.
And it's hoa.org.uk.
That's right.
Yeah. So hopefully people will go there and have a look. Certainly from my point of view, I've always enjoyed engaging with you, and I think that from a wider property perspective, There are so many people, individuals, who might wonder what on earth they can do, that I really hope this goes beyond just the people who are listening to this. I'd love to see it being pushed out more widely so that people can get a hint of what the HOA is. So listen, I'd like to say thanks very much, Paula, for coming in.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. And if anybody has any questions, I'm sure Paula will be happy to answer them.
Yeah,
So,
get in touch.
yeah, thanks very much for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you.